Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 14. Let the nightmare begin. The Chain in the Shadows. I've heard it said before that if you believe in angels, you must believe in demons as well. I'm not sure if I truly believe that either really exist, and my leanings change from mood to mood. But there are times when I wonder if there's something they're watching us, cloaked in the dark, hating us. When I felt the presence of something I couldn't see. When instincts overrode logic, and I couldn't close my eyes or turn my back to it, because I just didn't know. I can say with a certain amount of confidence that everyone has felt this way at some point in their life, with varying degrees of intensity and frequency. But that's not what this is about. Not entirely anyway. When I let myself believe in such things, I realized that it started around 10 years ago, when I spent a week at my aunt and uncle's house. They lived several hours away from my own home, and this was something I had always hated, seeing as their children were the only ones in the family anywhere close to my age. There were plenty of movies, games, and other activities to keep me occupied during my stay, bookending my experience in a way that nearly erased it from my thoughts altogether. Afterwards, it had seemed such a small thing to me that I mentioned it to no one. It was late at night, at some point in the middle of my stay. I'd woken quite suddenly in my bed for seemingly no reason at all, and couldn't get back to sleep, even after what seemed to be hours of laying in the dark. Defeated, I decided to get up and move around, maybe get a glass of water before trying again. I looked at the clock and noticed that it was very late. Early morning, in fact. 3-something, it said. But what could I do? As I walked out into the hallway, I noticed that I didn't feel quite right. A bit sick in my stomach and slightly anxious, unsettled. I turned on every light I came across. But maybe that was only my childish fear of the dark getting the best of me. I was only 11 at the time, after all, despite my attempts to reason my dread away, to banish it as I had done the dark. The feeling persisted all the way to the kitchen. I needed to calm down if I was to get any further sleep that night. I got myself a glass, filled it from the tap, and sat down at the kitchen table. I felt a bit lonely, knowing that I was the only person awake in the house, and I disliked looking at the empty chairs. So I turned my gaze to the large glass doors instead, the impenetrable pitch of the night blocking the backyard from view. I couldn't see anything out there, but I froze instantly, instinctively. I was being watched. Something was approaching the door, the windows. I couldn't see it, but it could see me clearly. With all the light flooding the kitchen, I was bathed in it, completely exposed, but I couldn't see out. Everything was awful. I wanted to run, but I couldn't make myself move an inch, not even to look away. And these flimsy, hateful walls, a thin pane of glass. What good would any of that do? None. Nowhere was safe, and it was coming. Soon enough, I could make out the shape. It was at eye level with me, on all fours. I couldn't see it with my eyes, not physically, but something in me inexplicably knew it was there, knew what it looked like and how it moved. Closer still, and I could distinguish its features. Thick, matted black fur against the black night, a chain around its throat, and yellow eyes that stared in at me through the glass. Its teeth and maw were dripping with saliva. It was a large dog, and it wasn't at the same time. It stopped just outside the door and glared at me. Snarls ripped from its throat, but I couldn't hear any of it, not really. I was too terrified to move, paralyzed by its malevolent gaze. It's not real, I thought. Just get up and walk away. Go back to bed. Eventually I did. I left my water on the table, full and tepid, and crept quietly up the stairs. It felt as if any sudden moves might set it off. So I did everything slowly and carefully, until I was lying in my bed. Despite my expectations, I was able to fall asleep relatively quickly. I don't think I even dreamed. In the morning, with the light of day and the presence of other people around me, the whole thing could be written off as a figment of my imagination. I was obviously spooked by something from the moment I got up. So it wasn't that far-fetched that my mind would play such a trick on me. I didn't say anything to anyone, simply because I didn't think it was anything significant. I mean, what even happened? I didn't exactly forget about it, but I didn't let it worry me either. It wasn't even something to move on from, just a strange thing that happened. Life went on. The next few years were difficult and rather hard on my family. Financially, emotionally, and health-wise as well. We got along well enough. Even after our house was foreclosed on, we switched towns, switched schools, and moved to a much smaller house as we waited for things to get better. I was 14 and starting high school when things started to settle down again. I didn't exactly approve of our new home. My brother Noah and I lived downstairs in the basement, and our rooms shared a wall. We enjoyed each other's company well enough, so it wasn't that bad spending so much time together. But there were times when he could get on my nerves. I would often stay up rather late reading in my room, and I eventually came to notice a strange clicking noise coming from his bedroom every couple of nights around midnight. It sounded as if he was flicking his light on and off. But why would he do that? I decided to just leave him be for a while. But the thing is, the more I noticed it, the more it started to bother me. I came to expect it to happen almost every night. A couple of weeks later, it was keeping me up at night, wondering what Noah thought he was doing, waiting until it would eventually stop. After a bit of internal debate, I decided to just ask him to please stop. Perhaps not so nicely, though. However, when I knocked and opened his door, I found the room dark, and Noah himself in bed, apparently fast asleep. How strange. I closed the door and returned to my room. The odd noise persisted. The next day, I decided that I was going to do a little experiment. Something must be making that noise after all. I told Noah what I noticed, and asked him to go around the basement rooms and click various things. Lights, doors, anything. While I waited and listened in my room for the sound that matched the one I was hearing at night. Turns out, it was the light in the little closet with the boiler that was attached to his room. There was a bare light bulb inside, and the pulling of that chain made the noise I had been hearing at night. There was no further explanation to be found. Soon after, Noah started reporting strange dreams, and the eerie feeling that he was being watched, even during the day. I assumed this was in response to our discovery, and mentally dismissed it, while outwardly showing my support and sympathy, until I started experiencing the same sort of thing. I would wake up at night paralyzed with fear, sometimes coming out of disturbing nightmares, other times out of perfectly normal sleep. I could no longer fall asleep with my back exposed. I found myself unable to bear leaving my door open at night. During the day, I felt paranoid, always looking over my shoulder and waiting for something to hurt me. Weeks later, something finally happened to me. While I was lifting my foot to climb the stairs and join my family for a meal, not a single thought in my head. I was suddenly awash with terror. I just ran to the door at the top of the stairs, frightened out of my wits for no apparent reason. When I stepped into the daylight, I turned around and looked behind me. It was there, at the bottom of the stairs, watching me. That dog. I knew it was there, but I couldn't see it, just like before. I closed the door and walked into the kitchen. No one saw or heard anything of my momentary panic, and I didn't feel like enlightening them. Not even Noah. Strange noises are fine. A creepy, unexplainable thing. But you're seeing phantom dogs now? Liar. Stupid, overactive imagination. Calm the hell down. I didn't want to go back down there, ever. But eventually, I just got back into the habit of it. Feeling constant dread? That's just normal. Cringing away from empty air? Normal. Nightmare again? Totally normal. My parents started arguing a lot. Dad would leave, going out on walks to clear his head. Gone for so long we'd start to wonder if he was ever coming back. We moved again. Switched towns. Switched schools. My grades went down the toilet. My real-life problems chased the unnatural fear away. Everything sort of peaked, and then slowly started to get better over the course of the next year. My aunt and uncle came to town and went out to lunch one day. The conversation was lighthearted enough between my siblings and cousins. until Noah brought up the weird happenings in our old house. My cousin Lena latched onto this and told us a few paranormal stories of her own. One day, she said, she was playing with her friends in their old backyard when she heard a noise. She said she didn't really hear it exactly, but she knew the sound. When she looked up, she saw a great big dog with a jingling chain around its neck. She had screamed and run inside to her mom, crying uncontrollably and completely inconsolable. She said she didn't really understand what had happened, feeling distinctly unsettled. I asked her what the dog looked like. Big and black, she said, with shaggy fur. Yellow eyes? I asked. Yes, yellow eyes. And it was bigger than a normal dog, taller. I saw that dog too, when I was staying at your house. I told them the short little story of how I woke up and saw a big, scary dog through the doors in their kitchen. We thought it was fun, this strange coincidence. Apparently, it was around the same time as well. What was going on then? I wonder aloud. The eyes in the dark. I remember it clear as day, as if it happened yesterday, even though it was almost 11 years ago. I didn't have the best of childhoods, if we're being totally honest. However, it was anything but uneventful. This all began on a Friday, on a day where there was no school. Might have been due to an inbound hurricane that Miami was known to be plagued by, or just because the superintendent of my school at the time felt like canceling or a holiday. Any way you slice it, though, it is irrelevant. I was at home playing Super Smash Bros. Melee on my GameCube with my brother, Eli. I was 11, soon to be 12, and he was 7, soon to be 8. We did almost everything together. Not to come off that we always got along, though. We fought a lot, as brothers do. On this particular day, however, my brother and I hadn't been fighting. In fact, we hadn't had a big fight in nearly a week. We were eager to stay joined, even nosing our way into each other's business to stay involved. About 4:30 p.m. rolls around, and I decide I want to take a break from the game to get some lemonade. I walked down the short hall and cut left down the next short hallway leading to the family room/dining room, and then went into the kitchen. My father and my stepmother also hadn't been fighting either. Strange, considering I'm hard-pressed to think of moments when they weren't. Anyway, I happened to look over at the giant dinosaur of a TV to notice they were watching a movie I had never heard of. "Hey," my father yells. I look back at him, startled. "You don't want to watch this," he said. "It's too scary for you." I heeded my father's command, poured my lemonade quickly, and left the kitchen. But my curiosity had been aroused. I had to see what he was so concerned with me seeing. I returned to their room, where my GameCube was set up on a smaller TV, and my brother had asked why our father yelled at me when I went in. I told him that they were watching something scary in the kitchen. We both agreed we should prove ourselves brave in our father's eyes by watching any amount of that movie that we could. Of course, we went back to our game, but we carefully watched the clock, waiting for 6 p.m. when our father would start cooking dinner for us before we left for our church group activities. When he called us into the kitchen, we could catch at least the very end of the movie, which we had deduced would naturally be the scariest part, and shrug it off as just a movie. The anticipation made my pulse race like the anticipation of waiting for Christmas, but different. Dad was going to be so proud of us, I thought. 6 o'clock finally crept upon us. Like clockwork, our father called us into the kitchen. We shot through the house, desperately hoping we could at least catch the last 10 minutes of the movie. We piled onto the couch while my father stirred Kraft macaroni and cheese noodles in the boiling pot. This was it, the moment we had waited for. And I remember regretting almost immediately sitting in front of the TV after what we witnessed. The movie was Jeepers Creepers. We came in at the police station scene where the monster, which is a Wendigo for those who ever wondered about it, pops out and Spider-Man's his way toward the main characters. I remember seeing it and thinking, what in the hell is that? I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't look away as the monster revealed its wicked strength, bizarre form, and terrible roar. I looked at my brother for a moment. He was horrified. I was too. But as soon as the movie ended, we shaped up. Our father set our full plates on the little table in the kitchen, completely unaware that my brother and I had watched the last portion of the movie. We were silent, but traded smiles and short giggles, as if to mask that it had terrified us. I remember trying to lord over my friends and my church group the fact that I had watched the scariest movie ever, which in all respects is still true in my opinion, stating that none of them would have been able to handle it. One friend specifically, the pastor's son, Caleb, replied with, "Yeah, you're probably right." As night came on and the safety of the light receded, the thrill of what I had achieved began to wane, and the reality of my fear began to sink in. I thought, strangely enough, that by that point, especially after having been to a church meeting and having a lesson from the pastor about God protecting believers, that fear would have been scrubbed clean. But it wasn't. So what did I do to deal with the unshakable terror that infested my little heart? I stayed up until midnight playing Sonic Adventure 2, battled to distract myself from the images that played themselves over and over again in my head of that horrible monster. In the past, when something had scared me, this method worked, diverting my focus towards something that did not frighten me, something I had power over. And I did have power in this game. I was actually very good. Finally, midnight rolled around, and I was tired enough to go to sleep. I suspected I would have a nightmare, cry when I woke up, and that would be the end of it. But nothing could have possibly prepared me for what happened next. As aforementioned, my parents' room opened into a short hallway, which had their room on one side. My room was on the other side, and something was in the middle. Clinging to the wall in a squatting position was a figure unlike anything I had ever seen before or since. It was monstrously large, large enough to easily injure or kill a child of my stature and threaten anyone in my whole family. I could only discern certain features it possessed through the darkness in the hall, darkness that it seemed to emit. Sharp claws on the ends of its toes and fingers. Folded wings, like a gargoyle's, rested on its back. Strands of curly gossamer hair seemed to be the only soft part of this manifestation before me. Yet most of it seemed to be shrouded in its own darkness. If I was terrified before this apparition made itself visible to me, then there is no word to describe the fear that overcame my very soul that night. My voice was stolen out of my throat. I wanted to scream, call for help, something, but my instincts begged me to reconsider, as if doing so would antagonize this interloper. My breath was sucked into my chest. My hand clutched the doorknob with such strength as to force my fingers to shake. My eyes streamed silent, hot tears. Somehow I managed to break the deadlock and close the door, slowly, as if it somehow wouldn't notice. I still remained mostly paralyzed, though. I staggered back to the space between the wall where my TV and GameCube were set up and laid down on my left side. I wanted to pray, but even the voice in my head was stolen from me. I clutched my arms and curled up, hoping the morning light would come and chase away the nightmare that sat in my hallway. But for the moment, with the door closed, I was safe. To my horror, I saw the white door swing smoothly open, like someone had pushed it open politely to come in. The hot tears I felt before returned, streaming with even greater intensity, burning my face. I covered my mouth with both hands, slammed my eyes shut, and trembled there in the dark until exhaustion took my consciousness from me. But even my sleep could not save me. It pursued me into the depths of my dream, in a way I would come to expect in the future. I was running for my life, past people who looked at me with confusion. I would hear voices say, "What's the matter?" Or, "Are you afraid?" Or, "Can I help you?" I could never reach out to these people. I could never muster my voice. Only run from the nightmare. And as I ran, it killed, slaughtered, destroyed, massacred anything that stood between it and myself. When in my dream, I ran into soldiers preparing to fight it, I knew they were doomed. No weapons they could bring against this monster would even slow it down, only make it angry. And so I abandoned the haven they attempted to make for me, only to find myself alone. It caught me, and I stared up into its face, not long enough to get a good look before it devoured me. I woke with a jolt. I was alive. I was alive? The dream felt so real. The fear still paralyzed me. I couldn't speak either. I remember awkwardly trying to move and not being able to speak. I was in that condition for several more days. When I finally came out of it, my family had asked what was the matter. I didn't answer them. They wouldn't believe me. How could they? They would only sit there and tell me why what I saw wasn't real and there was nothing to be afraid of. But there was. I had already seen it for myself. I shouldered this for some time alone. This horrible being of darkness loomed over me everywhere I went. It took up residence in the corner of my room opposite my bed to glare at me in my sleep. Oftentimes it pursued me in my dreams, ripening the fear as often as it could. I became victim to a demon I was entirely powerless to stop. 2 years later, a friend suggested, when I confided in her the truth of my plight, to call on the name of the Lord in its presence and demand that it leave. From what I had learned and what I'd been taught, I knew that ought to work. Demons aren't more powerful than God, I thought, and she reassured me it would work. The thing I didn't take into account is that demons are more powerful than people. That night, I did just as she said. I waited in my room until I felt its presence. When I turned and saw it towering over me in the corner, I began to whisper, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I compel you to be gone." I repeated that over and over and over, progressively getting louder and louder as I would say it, only stopping before I came to a shouting point. I could see that it was still there, but my confidence had built. For that night, at least, I was unafraid until that nightmare occurred. It wasn't long before I started high school, a brand new chapter in my life. The chapter where I would take my first steps into manhood, or so I thought at the time. And it was then that I began trying to rationalize away the demon that haunted me every night. Because compelling to leave in the name of Jesus failed to remove it from my room, my house, and my life, it must not actually be a demon. Perhaps it was more of a projection, a mentally instilled image of the thing that most terrified me in my young life that I needed to adjust to. Over a very short period of time, it became easy to believe that. But the story does not end here with this revelation. One night, early in my freshman year of high school, something peculiar happened. The demon was not in my room, manning his typical post. I sat up later than normal that night, as if awaiting its return, mostly out of fear that it would try to get the jump on me in reality as opposed to my dreams. But the night crept along and it was nowhere to be seen. Was it gone? Had I done it by acknowledging it as nothing more than a projection of my overactive imagination, generating an image of fear? To quote the Arbiter from Halo 3, were it so easy? I was woken from my sleep that night in a way I will never forget. A blood-curdling scream blasted through the entire house in the middle of the night, waking everyone up. My stepmother and sister were the first to respond as the screaming continued. They rushed over to the source of the screaming. My brother, in his room adjacent mine, screamed as if some horrible thing was attacking him. I saw the light from his room pour into the hallway and under the crack of my door. My sister and stepmother tried desperately to calm him down, but he was shaking with fear, screaming about being covered in human hand-sized spiders that had crawled all over him. A nightmare, must have been, but a dark premonition lingered in my mind as to what may have caused this. My brother batted away any notion that it was a dream. The spiders were real, he insisted. They came from a man in black with red eyes. My sister told me the next morning that his whole arm shook as he pointed at his curtain. My brother said he was standing in the curtains and laughing. From that night on, in any hours of darkness, my brother would always scan the dark in search of that figure with beaming red eyes. My sister did as I expected she would do with me had I confided in her. "It's only your imagination. It was just a dream." Shoo! I never said a word. I wish that I could. I wanted so badly to tell my brother that he wasn't alone, that he wasn't crazy, but I wouldn't have that chance for years to come. One night, something happened that had never happened before. It was at my grandmother's house. I was 15, he was 11. We chose to stay for a weekend because my cousins were in town. The thought crossed my mind to tell my cousin Jasper, the oldest of the grandkids, but what would that accomplish? My brother woke us all up trembling and crying. He crawled up into the 3-seat couch that Jasper and I were attempting to share and nuzzled in between us. After being woken like that, my cousin was prompted to ask what was wrong. "He's here," my brother worked out. "The man with red eyes. He's outside, staring at me." His voice was no higher than a whisper. "He has a knife." I looked out the glass door that fed into the back porch with a brick floor lined with a screen wall. And just outside of it was a figure shrouded in shadows, peering in from the darkness with piercing eyes. A shade of red that I couldn't compare to anything but hell itself. In the 4 years this demon had haunted me, it followed me everywhere I went, be it to a friend's house, a family member's, or even out of state to my mother's. This was nothing new, but never before and never again have I seen such eyes as could strip away all courage and resolve to believe I was anything but powerless and afraid. And never before had I seen at the same time as my brother. I remember one night, when I was 16, growing fed up with this stupid fear that seemed to only exist in the dark and the place where one should feel safest, but where I felt the most endangered. But enough was enough, I thought to myself. I'm 16, damn it, and I'm not going to be bothered by some stupid fear I had when I was a little kid. I shot up out of my bed, the only real courage I felt through this experience. Though I'd said it was only a stupid fear, I still knew that it was a very real stupid fear. I stared back at it through the dark, searching for the eyes I knew to be red. After not seeing its eyes open, I hopped off my bed, landing like a cat, as if I was still afraid of provoking it. It remained in its place, motionless. I walked towards it, slowly, half expecting it to vanish the closer I got, proving once and for all that it was a figment of my imagination, or for it to attack me as it attacked my brother, proving once and for all that it was a real demon feeding on my soul. The only sound breaking the suffocating silence was my pounding heart that compelled me to reconsider my present course of action. The other was my stifled breath, heavy from fear and the rapid beat of my heart. At last I stood before it, this giant thing that haunted me every moment of every night for the past 4 years, encroaching 5. It was broad, probably as wide as 2 of me. It exuded not just darkness, but power. I could feel tremendous pressure surrounding me, pressing down as if to force me to my knees. But I wouldn't let myself fall. I stretched out trembling fingers from a shaky hand and reached my hand forward. I'll pass my hand through it, and it'll disappear. Then I'll be rid of it. I assured myself this plan would work. One can't touch a figment of his own imagination in reality. It would simply vanish and reality would set in. And reality certainly did set in. My hand disappeared into shadow for a moment as I swiped it through this dark figure. It emerged as logically it should, but the shadowy figure remained. This demon would not be chased away so easily. And then I knew this was no figment. It wasn't the boogeyman. It wasn't some nightmare from years ago that came around every so often. It was real, and as I stepped back away from it, I felt it pushing down on me, not with its body, but with that very pressure I felt when I stood before it. It continued growing stronger and stronger until I leaped across the room and landed in my bed. I still didn't feel safe. I had angered it, or made it laugh. I don't really know, honestly. A lot of things would start changing, for the better it seemed, that year. My mother was moving to Georgia with my stepfather out of Fort Walton Beach, a place where the demon made it a habit to fly over the trees above my head and briefly eclipse the moon when I would walk home from the neighbors as a new way of creating fresh fear. They had invited me to come up and stay with them in this hotel for 2 weeks while they sorted out moving into the new house. The demon had followed me there as well, as it always did, and as I had come to believe it always would. Its presence became so familiar I was even aware of it during the day. It had become apparent to me that it never truly left me alone. It only became less visible. I had come to believe that fear would be a constant in my life. A fear of this thing, that it was real, that it would chase me in the shadows, that it would invade the sanctuary of my mind and my dreams and warp it all into a frightening illusion too close to reality to tell the difference. But one night in that hotel, the biggest change of all happened. I went to sleep, completely aware that the demon was watching me from the far corner of the hotel room opposite my parents' bed. I knew that it knew my fear had waned once again. I knew a nightmare would be coming. Even in my dream, I knew. In that dream, it was the night of a full moon. I was surrounded by my closest friends, all attempting to enjoy themselves and each other's company with a late-night swim at a watering hole they found in the woods, conveniently by a road. I knew what was going to happen, so I knew I needed to keep watch. It was coming for all of us. We would have to run. A swift shadow passed over us, created by the light of the moon. I knew it wasn't some bird. I called out to my friends to run as fast as they could to the vehicles we had with us. A black truck, a yellow punch buggy, and a white sedan. My best friend at the time, Dante, and I took the punch buggy. I don't know how or why that happened. We got tricked somehow. But before we could follow the others down the road, it was there cutting us off. It stood menacingly, flashing those red eyes that burned brighter than the high beams of the car. "Ram it," I said to Dante. He punched the gas. The tires screamed and the little car shot forward. Much to Dante's surprise, it leaped into the air and ran over the top of the car, just like in the movie Jeepers Creepers. It was attempting to recreate the initial fright that started all, I figured. But instead of staying to try again, I urged Dante to keep going. Keep running. I knew from previous nightmares that there was no fighting this thing. We hadn't gone for more than 5 minutes before we came upon the wreckage of the other vehicles. They were completely torn apart, my friends still alive inside, but barely. Dante and I frantically hauled them out and took to our feet as fast as we could. Suddenly, the ground shook ferociously. 3 walls shot up all around us, blocking us in with only one way out. And when we turned around, there it was, standing at the far end, waiting to kill us all. I looked at my friend. He was afraid. I turned my head over my shoulder to see my other friends hurt and equally as afraid. And I looked forward again at the demon that thirsted for our blood. I wanted so bad to protect my friends, to save them from the gruesome fate this wicked demon had in store for them. My hands balled into fists, and I started walking straight towards it, with everything in me urging me to run away, to find a way out. It trudged towards me. I could feel its pressure pounding away at my spirit, sapping my courage every moment that we drew closer to one another, until at last we stood face to face. I trembled, just as I did the last time I'd faced it this way. It was so powerful I thought I would collapse and die there, but I didn't. Fearing I didn't have much time left, and desiring to save my friends, I looked up into its face and said these 2 words. "Get out." My heart pounded out of my chest while I waited to see what would happen next. Would it skewer me on a spit? Would it chop me into tiny pieces with its blade-edged wings, or just continue to crush me with its titanic force? I didn't know, but I would not allow it to see that I was afraid. Not this time. To my shock, even to this day, 7 years later, it turned its back to me and walked away. The pressure subsided. My pounding heart's pace returned to normal. I could breathe again, and for the first time in 5 years, I woke up without feeling totally afraid. I couldn't feel the demon's presence anymore. It was over. It was finally over. Eventually, I would come to tell my sister about what I had experienced, but only her. I didn't have to tell my brother about it. He saw it too. To finally be able to tell him what I had wanted to say, that he wasn't crazy, that I believed him every time he said he saw the man with red eyes, meant more to the both of us than we could have ever realized. After he learned that I defeated it, it wasn't long before he stopped seeing it. The shadow had passed. We were safe again. I still didn't think my parents would have believed me. And I was right. They wouldn't have. Not unless they had seen it for themselves. For years, it stayed a secret between my brother and I, and my sister and I, respectively. We could trust each other, but we knew everyone else would think I was just seeing things, or that Eli and I were just little kids with overactive imaginations. Even my sister didn't believe it until I started explaining to her why my brother was seeing things, and that the way I described what he saw matched up perfectly. All she could say was, "I'm glad I never saw it," and laugh. I'm 23 now. I believed all this was behind me after my victory, and now serve as a story to either motivate people that any fear can be conquered or to be used to scare the crap out of whoever I wanted. But last fall, while up at college, I received a phone call from my stepmother. That isn't the unusual part. What was unusual was the first thing she asked me. "Have you ever seen something in the house?" Loaded question, I thought. Sure, I'd seen lots of things in the house, but what specifically was she getting at? I asked, and she told me a short story of the events of the night before. I was laying in bed when I had to go to the bathroom. When I sat up, I saw something dark move in front of the bed and go into my bathroom. I thought it was your brother, but when I lay back down, he was asleep in the bed next to me. I didn't need any more evidence to know that what I had been through and what I'd seen was real. But now, at last, I could explain to her those frightening moments in our past that perplexed her to that very day. I told her how I discovered it was a demon, and it had fed off of my fear. It also latched on at Eli and stayed there for 5 years. I told her everything. The nightmares, seeing it everywhere I went, even the time Eli and I saw it together. So she investigated, and she discovered something truly frightening. Ours was not the only house this demon had been in. Most of the people, I want to say 20 out of 30, all said the same thing. A dark figure would enter their house, and weird, unexplainable stuff would happen. Things ranging from mildly scary to downright terrifying. We eventually linked it to a family that still remains unknown, who regularly sacrifices chickens and leaves their remains by the train tracks on the opposite side of the neighborhood from where my house was. We don't know to this day if this demon was summoned intentionally or not, but those people unleashed a powerful evil into this world that continues to lurk in the shadows of the place that I called home. The house on Waverly Street. I was 7 when I moved into that house on Waverly Street. At least that's what my parents tell me. My recollection of that time is vague. I have memories of the big tree on our lawn, running around the garden with the boy next door. And I remember sitting on the living room floor playing with my He-Man figures. But my most vivid memories are of the recurring nightmares. To the best of my knowledge, they happened every night I stayed in that house. The first time, I woke during the early hours with a feeling that I was being watched. I lay there in the dark, listening intently, scared to move in case it drew the prowler's attention. I could hear or see nothing, but that feeling wouldn't go away. There was somebody or something in the room with me. I screwed up my eyes tightly, hoping it would just pass me by. I felt the bed shake, and I stiffened up like a statue, afraid to make even the slightest movement. And then I heard the sound of raspy breathing from the foot of the bed. It moved around the side of me, then stopped. Moments passed silently. Then I felt the breath on my face. Instinctively, I opened my eyes. I saw an emaciated man in a lab coat looming over me, an expression of horror etched into his pale, gaunt face, veins bulging from his forehead. I tried to scream, but he grasped me around the throat with his skeleton-like fingers and dragged me out of bed, jerking and contorting. I tried to grab onto something to stop him from taking me. He pulled me out of my room onto the landing, where I gripped the stair rail. He pulled at my arms, then at my feet, and I kicked and screamed in a furious fight for my freedom. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was waking up in my parents' bed. They had found me sleepwalking across the landing in the middle of the night. I had a lot of nightmares as a kid, which was put down to my active imagination. But sleepwalking, that was a first. I saw him again the following night. He yanked me from my bed with no warning, and this time he managed to pull me down the stairs. Once again, I woke in my parents' bed. My dad had woken in the night and found me lying at the foot of the stairs. I worked myself into such a panic over these dreams that my parents allowed me to stay up late with them one night. We watched TV, and I strained to stay awake. I don't remember going to bed that night. I just found myself sitting on the stairs, observing the hallway, waiting for him to arrive. A grandfather clock stood in the hallway, ticking away the minutes, until part of the wall opened up to reveal a concealed doorway, from which he emerged. He was wearing the same lab coat I'd seen him wear before, only this time it was smeared with blood. Whatever he'd been doing inside that room, I didn't want to find out. I watched with dread as he slowly and methodically slipped a pair of rubber surgical gloves into his hands. He tinted his fingers together, then turned and looked directly at me with his intense, deep-set eyes. A pained grimace stretched across his chalky face. I rushed upstairs, calling out for help, as he crawled behind me, swiping at my heels. I ran into my parents' bedroom. They were asleep and unaware of the commotion. Before I could reach their bed and shake them awake, my pursuer snatched me up in his bony arms and started pulling me away. I managed to grab onto the doorframe, and despite his efforts, he could not prise me from it. He relented for a moment, his breath heavy and labored against my neck. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a scalpel before slicing deep into my hands. I released my grip on the doorframe as blood dripped between my fingers. I shrieked out, but there was no sound. I could see Mom and Dad lying there fast asleep, oblivious, as this withered specter hauled me out of their room and all the way down to the bottom of the stairs. I tried to claw my way back, leaving streaks of blood on the carpets and walls in my wake. He pressed his fingers against my throat. I whimpered and choked, and my limbs thrashed around in frenzy. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime, and he suddenly abandoned his fight. I looked up to see the emaciated figure creeping back through the door from where it came. The door sealed shut, disappearing into the wall as though it never existed. A point came where I started to confuse my dreams with reality. I couldn't tell if this was all in my mind, or actually happening to me in the middle of the night. During the daylight hours, I examined the wall in the hallway, looking to see if there was some indication of a secret door. I told my parents and my grandma Ruth about the dreams, and though I never doubted their concern, there was not a lot they could do except reassure me. I stayed with my parents when I got particularly distressed, either in their bed, or we'd bring the blankets and pillows downstairs and have a sleepover in the living room. Nothing helped. My tormentor found me night after night, waiting until Mom and Dad were asleep before hauling me away. I tried to call out, but my screams were always silent. As he gripped his hand round my throat, he grew increasingly violent as he tried in vain to drag me into his secret room. Sometimes he would use his scalpel across my hands or under my fingernails. Other times, he would inject me with a syringe. It wasn't unusual for him to bite my fingers. As I prepared for the dreams, I rehearsed how I would try to fight him off, what I could grab onto as he dragged me downstairs. I knew if I could just hold out until the clock chimed, then I would survive another night, because that's when his door sealed shut. What terrified me most was the realization that if he got me into his secret room before the chime of the clock, the door would seal behind us, and nobody would ever see or hear from me again. I don't remember much else about that house, but we didn't stay long. We moved in with my grandma Ruth for a while, and even though there wasn't much room for all of us, at least those nightmares stopped, and so did the sleepwalking. Of course, I never forgot about those dreams. How could I? But I figured I was just a kid with an overactive imagination, and I never considered them particularly abnormal. That is until my teens, when I started to suspect something more sinister was at play. I was looking through old photo albums with my parents when we came across some from our old house on Waverly Street. Something wasn't right about that house. I heard my mom say to my dad. This aroused my curiosity. What do you mean, Mom? Well, I used to have bad feelings and nightmares when we were living there, she added. My dad tried to change the subject, But I persisted. What sort of nightmares? I inquired. I don't want to go into it. Just violent and disturbing dreams. I had recurring nightmares in that house too, I said. You were too young to remember your dreams, my dad interrupted. You probably just picked up on something you heard us talking about. I felt insulted, like they were dismissing me. But you don't forget dreams like those. I tried pushing for more information. They weren't forthcoming. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that we were able to talk about it again. I was in the living room with my parents, and my dad was reading the paper. He casually told my mom, "Our old house on Waverly Street is up for sale again." "Nobody stays there long," she replied. "It makes you wonder." My dad nodded in agreement. "So what exactly happened at that house?" I interjected. Maybe it was because so much time had passed, or perhaps it's because I was older, but they were more open with me this time. My mom explained how she'd had visions of a violent murder. Dead bodies lying on the floor, blood all over the walls, and she claimed she had felt a presence. When she was alone, she would often hear crying, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the house. She also revealed that my aunt and uncle had come down from Manchester to stay one weekend, and woke in the middle of the night to see a figure of a tall man at the bottom of the bed. My aunt and uncle had passed away by this point, so I was unable to ask them about their experiences, but Mom explained that they were so distressed by the incident. They returned home the next day. I asked my dad, "Did you have anything weird happen?" My dad has always been a very grounded skeptic, but I knew something had affected him too, though he wouldn't admit it. "There was just an uncomfortable feeling," he said, and volunteered nothing more. Ever since learning of my mom, aunt, and uncle's experiences in that house, I've been overwhelmed with curiosity. Like my dad, I'm quite the skeptic, and I was convinced there's a rational explanation for all this. Even so, I want to know more about that house. From time to time, I would check the newspaper, and just as my parents had said, the house was rarely occupied for more than 6 months before going up for sale. There wasn't much more I could find out at this time. I'm sure the information and history are available in some archive somewhere, but I wouldn't know where to start. However, I was passing by that area one day and got the idea to drive by the house. It was unoccupied, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary and felt no chills or foreboding. It was just an old house, but still, I wanted to know more. I noted down the phone number on the for sale sign, and later that day, I called the estate agents and requested a viewing. The lady who met me for the viewing introduced herself as Sophie. We went inside, and immediately I felt a shiver run over my body. It was probably my mind running away with me, but I got this eerie feeling. I can only describe it as being like the tension that lingers in the air after a big argument. If I'm honest, I barely recognized the interior of the house. My memory was vague, but there was one area that brought to mind those recurring nightmares I had as a child, and that was the hallway. I tried not to draw attention to myself, and continued the tour as Sophie gave me her sales pitch. As we walked around, I was convinced that the wall in the hallway was hiding something. "What's behind this wall?" I asked. The look on her face at that moment could disguise none of the lies she proceeded to tell me. First, she told me there was nothing there. It wasn't my intention to make her uncomfortable, but I'd come this far and I wanted some answers. "There's at least 15 foot between here and the external wall," I pointed out. I heard her mumbling on about an old boiler room that had been bricked over, but she stopped mid-sentence when I started knocking against the wall. This was not my usual kind of behavior. It was as though I'd been consumed by an obsession. "You know something, don't you?" Sophie asked me, a tone of surrender in her voice. "I used to live here as a kid. Something isn't right about this house, is it?" Although still apprehensive, it was as if I'd freed her from an eternal silence. "It could cost me my job if I told you. It can't be much worse than I already suspect," I said. "Was somebody murdered here?" She hesitated and took a cautious glance over her shoulder. "Do you mind if we talk about this somewhere else? I'm really not comfortable talking about it here." We decided to go for a coffee, and this is what I learned. In 1953, Dr. Victor Langford moved into Waverly Street with his wife Clara, and their teenage son, Lucas. The upper floor would serve as their living quarters, and he had the lower part of the house converted into a doctor's practice. His office was set just off the hallway, opposite his prized grandfather clock. Things were going well for the Langfords, and business was thriving. And then one day, Clara fell down the stairs in their home and broke her neck. She died instantly. Victor reacted to the tragedy by immersing himself in his work, using the practice as a distraction from the heartache. Lucas, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with his mother's death. With his father too busy to offer the emotional support he needed, he started adrift. He fell in with a bad crowd, started skipping school, and there were a couple of times he'd been caught drinking or brawling, and was escorted home by police. Victor barely noticed nor cared during this time. Once he closed his practice for the day, he would collapse into his armchair, an attempt to repress his grief with liquor. Some nights he'd drink himself into a coma. Other nights he would fly into a rage, smashing furniture and throwing things around the room. And sometimes it was his son who bore the brunt of his temper. Lucas was taken in by his grandparents soon after, leaving Victor Langford all alone in that house on Waverly Street. Later that year, on a cold autumn night, Victor was woken by a disturbance from downstairs. Emboldened by the liquor, he decided to go and confront the intruder. His practice was the only thing he had going for him, and he refused to let some thug take that away. Victor tiptoed downstairs in the darkness. He saw the light of a torch in the far room and heard the intruder rummaging through cupboards and shelves. Probably some junkie, after the drugs and syringes he kept on the premises. Victor snuck into his office, withdrew a scalpel from a drawer, and tucked into a corner and waited. The intruder entered the room, a rucksack over his shoulder, and his face covered by a black mask. Victor sprung out of the darkness, brandishing the scalpel, and ordered him to drop his bag. The masked man panicked and lunged towards him, attempting to push past and make his escape. Victor swiped out blindly as he fell backwards against the wall. The intruder staggered along the hallway and opened the front door before collapsing on the doorstep. Victor got to his feet and approached the fallen man. Blood gushed from a deep incision across his throat, for where the scalpel had made contact. Victor pulled the mask from the man's head to clear his airways. Staring back at him in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror, Victor saw the face of his son, Lucas. His heart wrenched at the sight before him. What had he done? How could he have known? His professional instincts kicked in, and he sprung to action. Lucas thrashed about, choking and gurgling on his own blood, as his father gripped his throat, pressing his bony fingers firmly against the wound. In an attempt to contain the bleeding, he proceeded to drag him towards his office, where he could clamp and stitch the laceration. By the time he got him there, however, it was too late. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime. Patients turned up to the practice the following day to find Lucas cradled in Dr. Langford's arms, unable to come to terms with killing his own son. Victor had turned the scalpel upon himself, slashing his own wrists, before bleeding to death on the floor of his office. The curse beyond the dust. I grew up in northern Nevada and have always had a love for the macabre side of things. Interested in ghost stories and the town's folklore, I often found myself searching for haunted locations around the city. All through high school, I never found one that was truly haunted, and it let me down. I began to think that there was nothing in the city that was weird enough for me. So, after I left high school, I went to college in Washington, in a town that I thought had much more history to it. I had only learned about the real dark stories of my hometown when I came back to visit at the beginning of this summer. During vacation, I was working this summer at a sushi restaurant that had employed me a few years before. I only really got the job because most of my friends were still working there too. I was up talking with the sushi crew, and they invited me to hang out on North 5th and talk about life and probably smoke a little. North 5th is a street that leads, as you would guess, out the north side of town. If you follow the nicely paved road out far enough, you will come across a cattle guard, and the pavement will give way to sand and dirt and rocks. The roads are lined with gnarled sagebrush, the kind that grows everywhere in Nevada like a cancer. I felt like I hadn't seen my friends in ages, and I didn't want to spend the night indoors, so I agreed to go. Once the clock struck 9 p.m., all 5 of us busted our asses out of the restaurant and headed up 5th Street. My friend Evan and I were in his Jeep, following behind Chris, Tyler, and Chris's girlfriend Maya. We passed the cattle guard as we were following our friends, and Evan turned to me. "I hope we don't go out too far." His eyes darted around his face, almost in a fit of paranoia. I had no idea what provoked that statement, but I felt like it would lead to something terrifying, so I bit down and swallowed the bait. "Why shouldn't we go out too far?" "Ghosts." I chuckled as I spoke, because I was a supernatural junkie. There isn't anything like the rush of encountering something that felt like it wasn't totally there. We waited in silence for a moment as I watched the weeds pass the Jeep while we got deeper and deeper into the desert. I'll never forget how my friend looked when he replied, like there was a history. Like there was something out North 5th that Evan had run into before and never wanted to see again. "I'll tell you later." His voice had turned cold. There was only fear present in his words. What? I probably sounded angrier than I wanted. Admittedly, I was irritated and confused at Evan's dodgy attitude. They don't like it when you talk about them. My head was jumping from thought to thought. I was trying to delve into my subconscious and remember what my family and friends used to say about the desert. My brain never stopped thinking. I was coming up with all kinds of monsters in my head. After a while, I began to think that I wasn't going to get any sleep when I got back home tonight. That was par for the course, though. As a matter of fact, my brain was often the cause of my sleep loss, and I hated it. Of course, if there wasn't a piece of me that loved the adrenaline from this supernatural, paranormal terror, I wouldn't have been driving out North 5th in the middle of the night to begin with. I seek it out. I love that feeling. I don't think I will anymore, though. A few minutes passed, and Evan spoke again. "Just be respectful. We're coming out to smoke and talk. We won't be destroying anything. We should be okay if we are respectful." Evan's words confused the hell out of me, because I wanted to know exactly what it was that he was talking about. Of course, he wouldn't tell me. I wanted to respect his fear as much as possible, even if I had to spend the next couple hours in a blind confusion. We arrived at a clearing way out of town, and as we got out the car, I heard him mumbling about reservation land and coyotes. I was still confused, but out of respect to his fear and the realization that he didn't want me to talk about it, I didn't say anything. The 2 of us met up with our 3 other friends, and they loaded their pipes as we all began talking. Our conversation bounced from parties we had been to, how life was for us now, how the restaurant was doing. We talked for maybe 30 minutes before Evan decided to speak up. He shivered when he did. "Are we on reservation land?" His body was so cold that his teeth were chattering. At least, I hope that's what it was. He told me the next day that he was terrified and wanted to leave as soon as he asked that question. One of our friends, Tyler, spoke up. "I think so." "Why? Are you not supposed to be on tribal grounds?" He was as confused as I was. Evan grabbed his hat and pushed down on his scalp. "Oh my God, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here." Evan's face was hard to see under the black sky. The moon was cast behind thick, shadowy clouds. All we had to light our adventure were a handful of dim stars. "Did you guys see any coyotes on the way here?" "It's important." He was leaning up against the door of his Jeep, almost as if it was holding him up. At this point, I was pretty freaked out too. I didn't know what was the matter, and he wouldn't tell me. So I was forced to sit in a cloud of confusion, which made me uneasy. "Why?" came Chris's voice, out the driver's seat of his car. "Wait, is that frogs?" Evan spoke up, more or less ignoring Chris's question. The rest of us sort of chuckled, but Evan got excited. He turned his ear away from the rest of us to get a better listen. No, frogs are good luck. They keep evil spirits away," he said, leaning off of his car, and now, standing, the fear in him had subsided at least a little bit, and it seemed like he was enjoying the experience a little more. Are you talking about skinwalkers? Is that what you're afraid of? Tyler let out a laugh after figuring out what it was that Evan was so afraid of. As he spoke, his dreadlocks swung around his neck. I don't give a shit about a skinwalker. Don't worry. I will kill every single one of them if they come try and mess with us. Tyler patted Evan on the shoulder and the group fell silent, minus the sound of inhalation and the occasional lighter flick. After 10 or so minutes had passed, Chris and his girlfriend Maya looked out the front of their car and turned the lights on. It wasn't strange, because Evan had been randomly turning his lights on when he couldn't handle being in the dark anymore. I was thankful because I was growing more uneasy by the minute. I wanted to ask exactly what a skinwalker was, but I was sure that I didn't want to figure it out. After a while, Chris turned his lights on again, and we all shifted our attention to the front of his car after we heard him yelp. Standing in the road about 30 feet ahead of us was a single coyote. Its eyes were dark and unreflective, unlike the way animals' eyes usually were. This one didn't reflect light from anywhere. As a matter of fact, they looked almost human, but they were devoid of emotion and staring at us. It wasn't a blank stare, there was intent in it. Evan and I had screamed, but Tyler remained quiet. Meanwhile, Chris and Maya had tightened their grip on each other, and Chris was trying to keep Maya calm. See, we all knew deep down what the skinwalkers were. We knew the stories. We've been hearing them since we were little kids. According to some people, if you find yourself on Indian reservation land at night and are causing a ruckus, or even just doing something you aren't supposed to be doing, they will come out. They will crawl from the shadows and peer over hilltops. They are subhuman and often come disguised as coyotes, vengeful creatures, and the only way to know what you're really looking at is to look at its eyes. They will never look natural. The animal's eyes will look flat like a human's. There will be very little gloss on them. I pulled in a breath and whispered to Evan, "We need to leave." I watched the coyote with him as he was nodding his head at me and opening his Jeep door. I slid slowly from the side of Chris's car to the door of Evan's Jeep. My eyes were fixed on the coyote's eyes, and it followed me. It was staring at me, unblinking as I climbed into the vehicle. Before I broke eye contact, I could have sworn that I saw it smile. The sight of its fangs shook me to the core. Long and sharp, they seemed to glow in the night. It howled, and was met with an echo of howling all around us. The sound of the dogs bellowing everywhere in the canyon twanged at my soul. It was an evil sound. The worst part, though, was what was just out of sight. The lights from our cars bathed the ground in front of us and illuminated the coyote, but on the edge of the light, my eyes caught multiple pairs of feet. There were maybe 10 people standing there behind the coyote, staying out of the light of our vehicles. Their skin was dark. It was dark and unnatural, like it wasn't really attached to the flesh, like it could slip off at any moment. The feet then began to move toward us. From dark-skinned ankles covered with mud and paint, the light slowly illuminated the hunched-over figures. Their knees were scraped from rocks and dirt, their legs covered in blood. I couldn't bear to see the full figure, so I slammed my eyes shut and felt Evan shift his car into reverse. Evan backed out of the clearing that we were parked in. The trees passed us, and I was sure that I could see glowing eyes in the shadows. The way the legends go, when the skinwalkers were in their human form, they would have the gaze of a beast. Their eyes would never match their bodies, always shining when they weren't supposed to be. We were backing up quickly, dangerously. I don't blame Evan for wanting out. He didn't even want in. As we broke through the tree line and back into the sagebrush, Evan turned the car around in a patch of grass off the side of the road. He must have seen an owl fly past because he pointed it out and said that it was good that we left. Owls are observers. They are smart creatures, and they know to leave when there is danger. So we should leave. Now, is Chris behind us? Evan's voice was trembling and his fear was easy to feel. I'm sure that mine was too. I remember looking back and seeing Chris's truck, but not before I saw the man standing right behind the Jeep. His eyes glowing white, skin painted black, wearing the skin of a mangled coyote. He had a sick grin on his face, a grin I'll never forget. His teeth were black and yellow, and his body looked like a gnarled root. I screamed and ducked under the seat as his hand slammed against the metal frame. There were no words coming from his mouth, but we both heard a howling, a dark howling coming from out in the darkness. Evan knew that it was time to stop asking questions, and he slammed on the accelerator. For a moment, we quit caring about Chris, Tyler, and Maya. We just wanted to get out of there. About 4 miles away from the tree line, Evan started to slow down. My heart was still beating furiously, and I was still huddled in the back seat of Evan's Jeep. It's okay. We aren't on reservation land anymore. We should be okay. His voice came slowly through long gasps for air. We drove until we reached the pavement and then stopped to wait for Chris. A few minutes had passed, and we saw his truck crest over the sagebrush behind us. My head flashed images of the eyes, brooding, waiting, thinking, floating in the trees. It was so much darker there than it was here in the city. It was darker, but there wasn't any less light than where we were. It was the air itself that felt dark. I parted my ways with Chris, Maya, and Tyler after I made sure that they got back to us safely. The ride with Evan was quiet, so I tried to break the silence. Man, I thought frogs were good luck. I tried to joke with him, but Evan didn't respond. He just pulled onto the street and drove me home. The silence bothered me. I felt bad for Evan because he didn't want to be there, and yet we talked him into going with us at work. He pulled up to my home, and we then parted ways. The next day, we all talked about the experience. I still didn't get a lot of information about them, so I left work and did a lot of research when I got home about skinwalkers. None of the natives wanted to talk about them, so it was hard to hear the local stories. I did find out some interesting things online, though. They say that they have all of these poisons and dust that they can use on you, or that they can take the shape of anything they've consumed. Anything that they've consumed. They say, when you lock eyes with one, it attaches itself to you, that it'll follow you to your house, try and break in, try and take you. They try and take you. All I can think about is that coyote's eyes. They seem so dead and empty. So here I am now, my dogs are barking downstairs, and there's a banging at my door. Man, I thought frogs were good luck.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.